What if I told you the government was planning on pushing retirement even further back? What if I told you you may never retire? Well, those are all a couple of facts, particularly in Canada, where the latest conversation from CTV News absolutely openly admits that this institute, CD Howe Institute, ran a survey and ran some numbers and ultimately said that we need to slowly and progressively push back the retirement age to 67. Well, they openly admit and say that there are lots of top-tier countries and markets that are proving that case. Well, they're also suggesting that the average life expectancy is over 10 years older than it was before. What they aren't necessarily saying is, what is that point of reference? There's also conversation and context that they're not necessarily including, and that's, when do people get ill? They're also not suggesting that, you know what if people work to 65, 67, and absolutely retire at 67, in which case that ultimately means that, based on statistics and the World Health Organization, where the average person gets ill chronically at 66, where does that leave a person at 67? Absolutely used up. So in many cases, I've shared stories with you. I mean, I've personally worked with people in my space, personal friends, coworkers, counterparts, and peers that retired at 65. Neither of them made it to 67. One made it just short of 66, and the other one just past 66. One passed away from cancer, and the other one a heart attack. So when I hear these conversations about governments continually trying to push back retirement, that is absolutely tragic. And this whole propaganda machine that we've all been seeing for the last 10 years in Canada is a further confirmation and a reaffirmation that you can't always believe everything you hear. If there's one thing that I've realized lately is you have to start thinking outside the box. And I've proven this time and time again. I'm not technically of the retired age myself, and likely if they push things back to 67 in Canada, I mean, from what I understand, places in Europe, certainly in Australia, they've pushed back to 67. And there's very few people that I've talked to or had conversations with that admit that 67 is fine, that they're loving life. See, this is what this ultimately is based on, is pushing back those resources, the availability for resources, or scaling it back. And even today, where, the official retirement age is 65, at least in Canada, there is a scaled down version if you should retire a little earlier. If you want to draw your pension, what they call the CPP, if you want to take that a little earlier, there's a vast slicing and percentage reduction of that pension. Well, the same thing would likely happen if you push that back to 67. But as we can all see and imagine, ultimately this is just a means for these governments to continually reducing resources. That pocket of resourcing capital that we hope when we finally hit those wee hours, those golden years, that we have enough money per month. We're already hearing lots of stories in Canada where a lot of people that have put into the system for years and years, decades. My grandparents, my parents, they've been paying into projects like CPP and, they've been putting into that government coffers only to come out on the back end not receiving a fraction of the money that they've contributed over the years. It's absolutely tragic. We know this is going on across the globe, but this is not uniquely a Canadian problem. Again, Australia have seen this, Europe. It just feels like we're getting shorted in some way. And so this pushes and reaffirms for me personally that you have to find your own means. And whereas in the US, where there's a lot more emphasis on things like the 401k and IRA, Roth IRA, the idea of doing your own investments, coming up with your own investment strategy is ultimately the goal. But the worst part is the focus on telling you are retired at 67 just doesn't seem to sit well. There's countries like in France They wanted to extend 1 year later, and their retirement age is much earlier than it is here in Canada. 1 year they want to push it back, and there was literal outrage. Well, in Canada, it's generally another notch on the belt of the government. And what I see here is another example of how a lot of these governments are telling us what we need to hear, telling us what's good for us. But ultimately, when we look at the statistics, and we know the average life expectancy is in that mid-70s, and people averagely, get ill on an average age of around 66, it begs the question, why would you ever want to retire at 67? I see people reach out to my comments all the time and say, you know what, my retirement age is noon on the day that I pass away. That's when I retire. My employer finally gave me the half day off. I find it humorous, chuckling, but, we can laugh about it a little bit. But it is actually quite a joke when you think about the fact that they want to push back 67 when what we're seeing is, again, 76 is the average life expectancy, at least in the US. Now, they tell us in Canada, when you go and you Google and you see life expectancy in Canada, they'll give you some number. I believe it's around 81 and a half or something like that. But that's not true. That's a calculated based on a number of factors and statistics. This is not the average. This is not truly, when you take the actual people that are going away, this is not the hard numbers. This is a calculated number based on a bunch of factors. So this 81 or 82 that Canada's trying to throw our way gets people in this mindset that, yeah, okay, I can work to 67, no problem. I can work to 70, no problem. And then I'll get my benefits and life's good. But what they're not telling us is, even for those people that wanted to continue working longer, the resources aren't there. I've been in this workplace for a while. I talked to a lot of people that got laid off around the time that I did. And many of them are struggling finding work. Some of them had to start their own little business. Some had to go side hustle. A couple of them got back into the saddle. But it's not easy anymore. Canada's grown its population by, I would say, almost 25% in the last 10 years. A lot of that's immigration. And ultimately, what we're seeing is a much stronger competition for the job front. We have a lot more people and a lot fewer jobs. And the idea of, asking people to work longer just doesn't necessarily have the solution. The only solution they're suggesting is further training, enhancing of skill sets, get people thinking again, possibly side hustle, part-time work, maybe changing skills, changing careers, giving different opportunities. Like what? Working at Tim Hortons, Canadian Tire, greeter at Walmart. Those are the types of opportunities. And while they're very simplistic type jobs, a lot of people are up and game for that. The fact is, those jobs are harder to get than you would believe. And being that ageism is pretty real, a lot of people are finding it harder to keep work at 50, 55. It just means that the challenges are real, and staying employed at those ages just that much more of a challenge, even if you wanted to. So ultimately, I'd like to hear your thoughts down below. How do you feel about extending work ages to 67? Maybe older. 67 today, could be older than that coming up. Anyway, please do be sure to drop a line. I'd love to hear your comments on that. And as always, I'd love to see you on the next one. See you real soon, everybody. Bye-bye.